What can we do? Okay, right now, let's say as a parent listening to this, I'm not a parent, but a parent listening to this, what can they do to kind of protect their child from this?
Listen to them. Understand. I mean, don't just listen to their words. Listen to them.
Welcome to the Prime Life Project podcast, a place to help you unlock your full potential, both mentally and physically, to become the best version of you. Welcome back to another episode of the Parental Project podcast, a place to help you both mentally and physically become the best version of yourself. I'm your host, Daniel James, and just to clarify, I am recording. So I just did an amazing intro, like bigging my guest up, looked down and realised I hadn't actually pressed record. And this is only the second time it's actually happened, I think, during the whole time I'm doing the podcast. But my guest today, very excited to have him on. The topic we're going to be talking about is something I've never really discussed before. And it's one of Mikey's friends. And again, Mikey had him on his podcast. And the guy's story is absolutely incredible. So I could spend the entire episode just discussing his story and where he's come from and what he does now. But what I really want to focus on is literally the part now of what he's doing and making such a big difference in people's lives, especially young kids' lives. So that's where we're going down on today's episode. But my guest today is Mr. Jay Pedley. How are we?
I'm very well, yourself.
I'm very well. So you've got a bit of humour in you now. You've got it out of your system. There should be no nerves here now. The fact I've just literally forgot to press record for 10 minutes of the episode.
That's
so
okay. We got over it.
We did get over it straight away. We're here now. We're where we are. So, Jay, like I said, I want to go into a lot of detail about what you do now because, like I said, we've had a real good conversation off air. The work you do is incredible. But I want to kind of take my audience back to sort of you growing up, to almost like pre-qualify you to what we're going to talk about because your story is very, very fascinating. So can you sort of take me back to sort of young Jay and kind of sort of family dynamic that you grew up in and sort of like your environment in school and sort of how that sort of led to you sort of going through your early days?
Yeah, of course I can. I mean, I started life pretty normally, as you do. Up to the age of about 7 or 8, life was pretty normal. Both parents were at work. Quite an affluent childhood, to be fair. There was always Christmas presents. There was always birthdays. But yes, both parents worked. Mum had a part-time job. She was at home when we came home from school, or she'd pick us up from school and so on. There was holidays, all that sort of stuff. So nothing really that would sort of bang a drum, to be fair. And then around sort of 7, 8, my father, he already had a relationship with alcohol, hit the bottle following the death of his father, and him and my mum looking after his mother, who had Parkinson's. They both lived with us when my grandfather died, and when my grandmother had Parkinson's, they both lived with us. So alcohol took over his entire being for a number of years. So life was pretty tricky. After about 18 months of that, all stability was lost. So we moved around. So with 18 months of my father hitting the bottle properly and my mum joining him, we moved. We had to move house. Money was all gone. It was always drunk. There was always at the pub. Me and my brother were left to our own devices a lot of the time. So yeah, whole stability gone.
Are you the eldest?
No, my brother's older than me. Yeah, he's 3 years older than me. So he'd have been sort of 11. I'd have been 8, 10, 11. I'd have been 7, 8. So
in the time on this, because I know we spoke about this off air, like, cause you're from a very like mining town. Whereabouts did you grow up?
I grew up in Eastwood.
Yeah.
So my father was a police officer to start with. That's how my mum met. I know we've just been talking about that. And then he worked for Moor Green Colliery, which most people did in that area, of course. And then he actually went on to work for a brewery in Nottingham, Shipston's, who used to sponsor Forest. So he's really happy with that, wasn't he? But yeah, it was a good life to start with. Yeah, it was okay. But then, shit hit the fan, as it were.
So when we talk about that, because this is where again trying to piece the puzzle here.
Yeah.
When his dad died, is that linked into around when the coal mining kind of stopped? Was there like a correlation between the two there, or
not really? No, because I don't think the pit didn't close. I was there when they knocked the I can't remember what it was called now.
Big wheel
The
thing.
mine, the lift shaft. When I was there when they demolished it, so I just remember being pushed in as a pushchair. To be fair, or it might have been a little bike I had. But then they carried on working because they were working in the workshops, and then my father went to work at Shipston's. So it wasn't necessarily a correlation with the pit closing. He went over to there because he wanted to, he'd had a history of working with pubs. My grandfather worked at Kimberley Ales. He used to run pubs. So my grandfather's job was when a landlord wasn't paying his upkeep, they used to come in, chuck him out, and then my dad would go in and run the pub whilst they found somebody else. So he kind of went back into that and sort of managed the distribution side of Shipston's Ales at the time. To my grandfather dying was just the relationship with alcohol was always there, and it was there probably from. And my dad will tell you he smoked since he was 11 and he's drank since he was 14, That's
very much the thing to do that back in the day, wasn't it? Like in Eastwards and your Ripley's, like your small, like your mining bit, that's very much the kind of the norm. So to hear that now, people be like, well, it's a bit... But actually back then, that was kind of the normal thing.
Absolutely. As soon as you knocked off at the pit, you went to the pub. You took your keep on the table, you went to the pub. Even working for the police, because he worked for Nottinghamshire Constabulary for a number of years. That was his first career. He'll tell you he watched 66 World Cup at the local Nick, but he used to walk the beat, and he'd walk the beat with his sergeant, and they'd have half a pint in every pub. They'd phone these old police boxes at the end of the street. They'd phone in saying everything was fine. Then the sergeant drive him home, having had a skinful. That was the 60s, early 70s, It was acceptable then. I mean, now it's a no-go. So even in law enforcement, there was a culture of drinking. I remember working in the early part of my career and going into one of the Nicks in Derby City, and they had its own bar, and it was like 90 pence a pint. So once you knocked off, everybody went there and had a few pints, Do you
think with this, because again, this is an interesting conversation about like masculinity and men, in that, because obviously your dad idolised your dad, his dad, I'm assuming, like, working closely together. Like, I'm not saying idolise maybe a strong word, but like, you look up to your dad, don't you? Do you think there was an issue there with dealing with the loss of that, the grief? Because I think grief is a massive thing for a lot of people. I'm trying to, with this thing here, I'm trying to paint the picture of sort of where we're at, because we're going to get into your school days in a second. But for me, like, your upbringing is very, very unique in a sense of actually being very aware of what was going on in that situation, and you were at an age where I imagine you took a lot from it. This is kind of a bit bizarre here. A lot of positives from it, meaning, without realising it, you were able to read, when your dad came in, what kind of dad was going to come home. So straight away, that's going to help you read. Now, as an adult, doing what you do, your ability to read, well, is it happy dad? Is it sad dad? Is it angry dad? So you then straight away, as soon as he comes in the door, you can see from his mannerisms, that now stands you in good stead. Now, at the time, you wouldn't have realised that. And again, I'm assuming you'd rather not have had that experience. But I'm trying to see from... Like your dad, who's, again, law enforcement, hard-working person, what potentially caused that sort of demise into alcoholism? And I know it's a very long topic in itself, but...
My father didn't really have a relationship with his father. My father was raised by his auntie, because my grandfather and grandmother, they only wanted one child. Because of his job in the brewery, they were able to go on cruises, and they were able to go here, there, and everywhere. So my father was raised by his auntie. So I think... my father, when my grandfather, when they started to work together, when my father was an adult, I think he wanted to reconnect, which is probably where the idolisation came in, because he had quite a traumatic upbringing with the hands of his aunt. It's quite a volatile situation. It's you're being raised by not your parents. Your parents are probably on some cruise somewhere doing something. And I think when my father was an adult and he was doing his, going through his careers and what he was doing, I think my grandfather was proud of him for doing that, and I think my dad relished that because he didn't have it as growing up. So then when he lost his father, well, he only really had his father for a certain period of time, didn't he?
And he just got back that connection, and then it's kind of taken away.
So when you lose that, or you didn't have that connection, and you've already gone through, you've already processed what childhood's like, you've already processed education, to have and try and build a relationship when the imprint is already on you, that takes a protracted period of time. Whereas a child, you're a sponge, and you build and you get those attachments quite quickly. But with people who are I think as distant with my father as his parents were, particularly my grandmother, for instance, that took a long time. And I think then the loss of that just hit harder, to be fair.
So I think grief hits us all, even like people that are more emotionally aware and understand these things. Like grief, again, I've gone through something myself. I've got listeners to the podcast, they'll know I've gone through a lot of grief myself personally. Not the loss of someone, but the loss of a thing.
Yeah.
And that can be just as hard because you don't really understand what you're grieving for, and it's like that Pandora's box. You don't really know what it is.
No.
So for me, with this now, I want to kind of like talk about your school. So I said we're going to go back to this because there's something really interesting. We're going to go back to this about the job you do now, about fatherhood and the role model of fathers. I think it's a massive thing. But I just want to like just dig into your story a bit more until we loop back into this. So we'll hold that thought. So I remember you saying that you got bullied at school as well. I can't imagine anyone bullying you at the size. I didn't always know what that is. Because this intro, that was with Mikey about this as well. Like Mikey at school struggled with bullying. I struggled at school with bullying. So yourself as well. So again, you've got this at home where the home environment's a bit volatile. And for most kids, like school's a safe space. And potentially you'd expect in your situation for you to become the bully. And this is something that I loved what you said on Mikey's podcast, and it's really stuck with me that, because again, I've had someone come on talking about bullying, and basically that most bullies have got stuff going on at home. But the thing that I really like what we said about, most bullies are bullying themselves in here. Yeah. And that was really powerful. Yeah. So everything was set up for you to kind of go to school and be this bully, but you weren't. You actually got bullied. So can you explain how that must have been? Because you expect school to be a safe haven, and then it's not. How did that not break you?
I think because it was so chaotic. And I know I talked before with Mikey about the chaos that was going off in my own head, and this is about the bully. And I think the phrase I used was on describe my daughter describing a bully. I says, be careful how you label a bully, because you don't know what's going off. They might be being bullied at home by somebody, or being bullied by their own mind.
Exactly, that's it.
And I think at that point, I was probably being bullied by my own mind. Because money had dried up, didn't have the best of things, so I didn't have the haircut. I always remember my mum getting my grandfather on her father to cut my hair. You didn't have the best of trainers, you didn't have the right coat. I was tall, I was a beanpole. I had these whacking great jugs sticking out the side of me, side of my head, and I was a bit of I wouldn't say I was a recluse, because I had friends, but I didn't really know my place. And if you join a school, because the first senior school I went to, for instance, most of my friends went to the other senior school. There's only a handful of us went to the other one. And the feeder schools there, they'd already got their groups. And then in walks this, they used to call me rugby ball head, because my head was shaped like a rug, because I was so thin.
I got called melon head. My head was so big.
Well, there you go. So it was, you just learnt to cope, and there's nothing more resilient than a child who's dealing with things at home and at school. There's nothing more resilient in what builds resilience in those situations, because you kind of start to accept that's your lot. I'm going to get it at home. I know what my dad, like you say, happy. Which dad have I got? From sort of 0 to 7, my dad was a happy, jolly guy. From 7 onwards, he wasn't. You go to school, the bullies, as you would term them, they weren't really bullies. They just homed in.
That's the thing with school. You look back now, the kids that age, they're not really bullies.
No.
But as a kid, you're very...
but kids can be cruel,
exactly,
can't
but they don't know what they're doing.
They don't
know what they're doing. It's just words to them. And you hear it now, and kids will say words, but they don't really know what they're saying. And again, it's because, as you said, you're bullying yourself. You're not okay with yourself. You then go home and you keep replaying it. Why they call you melonhead? Like, for them, melonhead. Like, what is it? Rugby ball head. It's not really insulting. It's like saying, again, you had a big head. I had a big head for my body as well. Okay, but as a kid, you're internalising that. Why are they saying that to me? Like, what do the girls think of me? Do all the girls think I've got a massive head? And then you become even more like of a recluse within yourself, because again, as you said, you keep replaying it, and the bullies only said it to you once or twice, and you're saying to yourself constantly. It then makes you kind of want to just be like...
Absolutely. Well, I mean, even down, I always remember sitting sitting in art. I went to Alderca School to start with. I remember sitting in Mr. Robinson's art class, and there was 2 Lees and a Gaz, and they would watch Question Sport every time it was on, and they were the sporty guys, and they knew that I wasn't really a sporty guy at the time, and they would ask me questions. So who won the World Cup in this year? And because I didn't answer... I got it in the neck, And on the walk home, because I walked home, we used to get the bus from school every now and again if we'd got some cash on us. I used to walk home and used to walk past their junior school. I always remember, I don't know which one of them threw 2 pence. and he smacked me right at the side of the head. And as I turned around, I lost my mind about it, and I went to, and he shoved me. This gaz had gone down behind me, and I shoved me straight over. Of course, everybody stands around laughing. Now, to them, that's quite a throwaway moment. Because they're going to
Maybe
go
laughing a joke. Oh,
yeah,
that's
laughing
funny.
a joke.
Yeah.
For me, I then had to go home, and I didn't know what I was walking into at home either. So that trauma, as it would have been, just stayed with me. But yeah, I think if I'd have stayed in that school, we hadn't moved again, and moved to a different sort of town, because I moved over to Ripley. So I went from Alderca to what was Ripley Mill Hill, which is now Ripley Academy. I think it might have gone a different way for me. But when I then moved schools, and I'd said it before, and you start that new school, and the teacher says, you know, I'm going to put you with this group are fine, you know, and all those, you know, all those young people are going, yeah, we're you don't want to hang around with them because they're naughty, you know, and Hannah was one of those, you sort of go, well, I don't want to be picked on. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be a bully, but I'm not going to be picked on. So I'm going to align myself with those people who, and I knew they were, because, you know, back in the day in the old towns, I always remember, I always say I always remember. So I'm conscious, I listened to one of the podcasts, but I say, I always remember. And I think, do you? So
Some people say the other day.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the other day. It was 7 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. I vaguely remember. So one of the first sort of days I was at that school, I started in just at the end of the summer term, and you know, I still speak to him now, and we have a laugh and a joke every now and again. And he was a lad called Shane, and he just walked up and punched me flat out in the stomach in front of everybody, and I didn't go down, and I didn't hit him back, but we had a moment where he was testing me, and I knew that him and a couple of the others were part of that group who would. They weren't the toughest, but they were a bit untouchable, because collectively, they can withstand anything, and I align myself with them. Yeah.
So how did you? Because this is interesting. Because obviously in that moment, then it's like one of those things where it could have turned nasty. You could have then punched him one, and now said it could have gone down another path. Looking back now, how did you navigate everything that was going on? I know you said you had no choice there. Like you literally really had no choice. But like I said, you look at some of the kids that you're working with now.
Yeah.
It's very easy to fall down another path.
Yeah.
How did you? Because again, talking to you now, you're very, very level-headed. Like you've clearly got your head screwed on, and I imagine back then is when you were kind of processing a lot of this stuff. How did you process this, and how did you kind of develop into the person that you are now? Because, like you said, there's a lot of trauma there. A lot of adults have carried their trauma from childhood into adulthood. Yeah. What have you done to work on that trauma to make sure that you now don't pass it on to your kids?
As a child who's dealing with sort of trauma at home, because I think when I started that school, my father had gone to prison, so we were having to have those conversations with school, and I didn't want people to know. You become hyper vigilant, and you become really hypersensitive to all the things that are going on around you, and so you can hear a comment that somebody said the other side of the room that might paranoially be aimed at you. So then you have to chameleon over and deal with that, and then there'll be a group of lads over there who you think they're looking at me in a bit of a funny way, and then they'll start walking over, so you then have to be the chameleon and move again, and young people that are in that type of hypervigilance are so aware of their surroundings that they are able to, it's like the predator approach, isn't it? You know, you camouflage yourself wherever it is you are. And that's what I started doing, you know, and when I was I was talking to somebody who was quite knowledgeable about something, I would be a certain person. And then when I was with the friends who were the sort of the tough guys, I was the tough guy. You know, when I was at home, I was, you know, me recluse, playing my Super Nintendo in my bedroom, or going out and, you know, in the end, you know, taking drugs and doing whatever I was doing. And the coping mechanism came for me, I think, because I was so hyper-vigilant, because I was so hypersensitive to everything that was going on around me. Somebody then offers you resin. Yeah, all right. You know, I was smoking anyway. My mum gave me my first cigarette when my dad went to prison. I was 12, you know. Just handed me one back. Bottom of Nottingham, where Broadmarsh is, she just leant back. We were sat in a brown Ford Granada, and she just gave me this cigarette. That's how I started smoking. So it was a natural thing, because smoking was already a comfort thing. the kids I hung around with at school were smokers, and then a couple of those branched off into, this weekend we've been smoking this, and do you want some? And that's when that sort of took over for me as well.
Yeah.
So that was a trope. That was a coping mechanism for me to be able to see through that sort of
period,
couple of years where things were really hotting up, and my dad had come out of prison. They were always at the pub, and we never had any money. Where bailiffs knocking at the door, and it was just relentless, constant relentless. It was like somebody stood in front of you, punching you, gut punching you constantly. When you think you're settled, something else will happen, So going from that, I decided that because my health probably would have failed, and I remember a GP telling me that if you carry on, you're going to do. I got arrested, I didn't get kicked out of school. Thank goodness they let me do my exams.
Yeah.
But I just recognised in myself that I needed to do something, and I joined the fair.
Yeah.
That's how I did it. A friend of mine was already working on the fair, so I joined the fair. That got me out of the bubble that I was in at the time. Although some of the fair lads were smoking drugs and doing what they were doing, I didn't, because you were never...
You could go there as a different version of you. Like, you go in there so you don't have to be a smoker or do this.
And I worked hard.
Yeah.
I worked hard. I worked £70 a week living on pot noodles every night, But I worked really hard. But because you were on a ride, or there was a few rides in your little circle, you'd go for... It was a travelling fair, so you go from one place to another. So you didn't stay in any one place long enough to form those sort of allegiances.
Yeah.
You wouldn't, there's so many different fair rides knocking around the country. You wouldn't be with the same guys from one night to the next, to be fair. You could be in Swansea one night, Cardiff the following night, sleeping in the back of a lorry, you were busy. And that broke my cycle. And then going back in, and I alluded to it in the podcast I did at the old farm bus with Mikey, going back in, and going back into the social housing estate and watching everybody do the same thing, it would have been so easy for me to go straight back into it.
Yep.
And I just didn't want to. I just thought, I don't want to be that person. I'd seen not a different life. It was because working on the fair is not easy.
Yeah. You've been to different areas, I imagine. So you've been to different areas that weren't where you were. And I know you travelled a bit anyway, but travelling as a kid, going from school to school, dealing with that trauma, you're not really experiencing where you are. Because as you said, you don't stay there long enough to really make any connections, I imagine. You're just like, well, we're going to move soon. So you kind of... But then actually as a young adult, you can actually kind of, this is what this area looks like. Yeah, you're going to sit for a night, but then you go back to where you were and you're like, it's a bit of a...
Yeah. We did a thing at Lewisham in central London, and when we set up the rides, the police had put all these barricades around. There was security around there, and we sort of went over to them. We said, "Well, these to keep us away from the locals," and they went, "No, that's to keep them away from you, because you wouldn't stand any of that." Yeah. I think even though I moved around, I did it because I worked the Virgin Atlantic Summer Party in 1996, and I kid you not, on my daughter's life, Richard Branson driving around on his motorised lawnmower. We was on his cricket in Oxfordshire, on his cricket pitch, and he was riding around, and he got free McDonald's for everybody. So all of his Virgin Atlantic and Virgin Radio and all that staff, and they had Virgin Coke at the time. Everybody would come over the course of 3 nights, and they'd have a concert on. There were artists that were Virgin, that were signed to Virgin. They were sort of TV celebrities that were signed up to a Virgin contract, and they'd all make appearances with, free McDonald's, free Pizza Hut, free drinks. And I think when you see those, and
you see a different way of living. Like you got something to. We spoke about this off air. When you're from a small town, you've got a small town mentality. You see these people on TV, and again, you kind of idolise them. Again, being they're just normal people. Yeah. Like when you hang out with footballers, and there's some people that I've coached before, like the millionaires. Yeah. Completely normal people, but you see that, and you're actually there in real life. You see them, you're like, okay, like I can touch you. You're just there, like you're real. Yeah. So you can be like, okay, this is I maybe can't aspire to have that, but it kind of gives you a different benchmark to aim for, rather than being like all your mates that are just round the pub.
Yeah, and then you go back to the ride, and then you get up the following morning, and Neil, the guy who's always every season goes back on the fair, and he sits there all depressed looking, and all he does is press a button and watch the ride go round, and he's been doing it 30 years and worked for the same guy, has lived in a caravan. I don't want that. Yep. And then you think, well, I don't want that. I'm not going to stay on the fair. I've seen certain sort of aspects of life, and then you go back to your social housing estate because you stop working on the fair and you think, I need to get a job. So I started welding. That I got a YTS. I was a spot welder at a place in Heanor. I was getting up every morning and cycling to Heanor in freezing conditions. It was horrible, and I didn't like it. And then going back to the social housing estate and arguing with my dad because he was drunk, and then watching there was a guy on the estate called Yakka. I don't know why they called him Yakka, no idea. But he was always the one who was on the roof taking lead, and he was always weighing in copper, and he was always trying to do your deal and smoking weed and doing whatever he was doing. He was that guy, him and Wayne. And I just thought, no, I'm not doing this. And then I went back to college. I thought I've got to do something else, because in my head, and I was thinking about this on the way here, because I was listening back to the podcast that I'd done before in the week, and in my head I kind of thought, what's my future look like? What does my kids' future look like? Is this the same script? Are my kids going to grow up on a social housing estate? Not that there's anything wrong with that, because I did, and I made a semi-success of my life. Am I going to be the dad who does this, who's unhappy with his job and doesn't feel any level of fulfillment? And is that going to pass on to my child? No, I don't want that either. So what do? I've got to change it. I've got to do something with it, because it's only in my gift at that point for me to make those changes, isn't it? And I was very lucky in respect of the people that worked around me, who helped mentor me and helped me mentor other young people, and then that springboarded me into certain aspects of work. And then I enjoyed working with youth. I enjoyed working with real disaffected young people. I worked with the top 10 young offenders or those at risk of reoffending in Derby City, Department of Active Sports programme at the time. There's millions of pounds knocking around at that part of my life, in those areas. And I got such a level of fulfillment and grief and loss, because some of them didn't do perhaps as well as I would want them to do. And you have to accept, and that's a big learning curve.
Yeah.
You can't, you
can't win everything.
Can't fix everything. And then I wanted to do more. So I did. And I put myself through university. I worked full time, put myself through university, and just, then.
So what do you do now? What is your job right now?
I'm a manager for child in care and child protection services for a local authority.
So what does your job actually entail right now?
My job entails now, I manage the supervisors of social workers, but I started as a community care worker and worked my way up through social work. So I got qualified to be a social worker. I did many years in child protection, then I worked in children in care services, and then I went into sort of supervisor level, and then into manager level.
Because this is the thing with this is why I wanted to go into your story first. So, like I said, it almost like pre-qualifies you for this, to be like, you can relate to these kids. Like, it's like the story you've sort of been through. Like, you can notice patterns, I assume, in your own life of some way, shape, or form. Maybe not to, like, some of these kids have had real extreme things, I imagine. And again,
far worse than I've ever
experienced. It puts things into perspective for you.
Yeah.
But you can still relate in some way. Like, you can be like, I kind of get what that feels like.
I used to find it quite frustrating, if I'm honest, when I first started doing this type of work, going into houses where you could see that, dad or mum or both had a real significant issue with alcohol. There was no food in the cupboards. The kids' shoes were falling off the feet. I mean, the amount of times I walked away in tears, because you can't just take those. No. You've got to leave them there, and you've got to try and work to improve their position, improve their life chances and their life outcomes, and work with the parents to make, to effect decent change in a child's life. If the parents aren't doing it, you need to sort of change the mindset of parents, to be fair, because that's where the imprint comes from. So the first few years of my career was extremely difficult for me, because even doing that career, my parents were still using alcohol, and they were still at the pub, and you'd always phone, you knew where they were, they were always at the pub, so it was very difficult.
Did you feel a sense of, what age were these kids you were, is it all age ranges, or was it more mainly like teenagers at that time?
Which,
when you were going, when you first started out, and you're saying like you'd... Like,
0 to 18.
So, in a way, I don't know if anyone's ever asked you this or if you've thought about this, did it also hit you harder when you're going into situations where the parents were alcoholics, that you were almost trying to, quote unquote, save yourself in some way, shape or form? Like, you see these kids, you see a bit of yourself in there, and that's potentially why I found it a bit harder, because like you said, your parents were back at home, like still using the alcohol, and it's almost like there's a bit of you in that kid, that wants to do more, but you can't because you've got certain things you can and can't do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very frustrating because we're statutory. That we're bound by governance. Whereas I suppose in the work that I was doing with the active sports program, working with the teenagers, I wasn't. Although we were governed because there was funding streams you had to, or that was just prior to DBS check or old CLB check. You had to be police checked. You had all that sort of stuff. The gloves were kind of off. You could tailor what you were doing to assist a young person to make a positive change. Whereas in the realms of local authority, rightly so, we're governed. We have statutory obligations, things we can and can't do. You can't. I mean, people think of a social worker, they think the child snatcher off Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. We're not. I could talk forever about what social work actually is, but you go into those situations and you see young people who are really, really struggling. They might not be at risk there and then of imminent death or whatever, but they're suffering.
Are you trying to preempt what could happen?
Yeah.
So what is your job then? You said they would talk for hours. If you could summarise, what is the job of a social worker? Because as you said, social worker, most people think you're basically taking the kids away from the parents. In my head, it's not. What you're trying to do is you're trying to stop that from happening at all costs by putting things in place to get the parents in a good place to actually be good parents. Because as we fundamentally spoke about a little bit off air, like you've got to think the family scripts.
Yeah.
If their parents, again, you look at let's say your dad, his dad potentially was in the war, that sort of age. So you've got to look at the kind of stuff that has gone on through there. And if it wasn't him, then his dad was definitely in the war.
Yeah.
So you've got to look at what's been passed down. So fundamentally, if the parents don't know, they don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know how to actually parent, and they're fundamentally doing the best with what they know. And it may be shambolic to us lot that can see it.
Chaos.
But to them,
Absolute
but to
chaos,
them, some of them may not have a clue that this is chaos. And does that make sense? So with this, what do you do? Like, what's the actual thing? If you could summarise it.
I protect children. Yeah. That's my job.
How?
By empowering their parents to make positive changes.
And what's that look like? Because even with this, listen to this, my audience listening to this, hopefully no one's listening to this podcast, and unless it's specifically happened to them, maybe happened to them in childhood, but it's giving parents information now. So how do you empower? How do you help parents be better parents in this situation? Because we spoke about this off air. When you get kids that are 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, and they're troublesome kids, everyone blames the kids.
Yeah.
But it's not. It comes fundamentally down to parents.
Yeah.
So how do you help these parents become empowered, especially, I assume, if they don't want to be or take no responsibility?
So rewind slightly. So the work that I've done and have started to continue to do in sort of working with the youth, we're working one-to-one with young people, and we're, Mikey's organisation, they do the same, and you work with young people whose home life is a certain way, and what used to happen is there was sort of the charitable stuff, so the Sport England stuff and the New Deal stuff and all those things. There was a funding stream used to work, in the communities with young people. There was the early help services. So if there was a parent or set of parents or carers who perhaps needed some advice on parenting, they were struggling with the child's behaviour, or they were struggling with teenage behaviour, that level was there as well. And then the more serious aspect, when children were sort of at risk of harm or ongoing significant harm, as the term is, that's when social workers come in, and we have to work quite intensively with parents to address issues around alcohol, drug misuse, mental health, domestic abuse.
So you're quite far on down the chain almost.
Not anymore, we're not, because the last sort of 10 to 12 years of funding cuts means that our early help services are depleted to a point where some of the work that my staff do and some of the work I do, because I case hold still, I do some, so still like to case hold and still like to go and do visits and make sure that I can keep my sort of hand in at the coal face, is the parenting aspect, where parents will naively think, well, he's not behaving, he's not sleeping at night, you need to take him with you. Well, that's not how it works. And then right at the other end, dealing with really complex young people who have suffered significant level of trauma, where they're attempting to take their own life. There's a multi-agency, involvement with them. They're hospitalised. They're in prisons, youth offending institutions. So it goes from one extreme to another now because certain aspects that were there, or certain sort of tiers of support is no longer there, we have to be this overarching sort of.
And that must be frustrating because it's like you almost become like a jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. Like, rather than being specific at like, this is what we're doing. Like when the kids are really suffering, this is what we're good at. Or with the parents, this is what we're good at. It's almost like your resources are so spread thin, you kind of can't actually narrow down and like, this is the thing. It's like, damn, we've got all these things, like, and you don't really know what you're going to get one day to the next.
No.
I want to go back, because I didn't know we were going to go down this rabbit hole here, like, because we'll go back to the parents thing, and then I want to go into the other extreme and talk about the kids as well, because I think that's a big thing with that, like, the frustration for me about the lack of help with kids struggling with mental health is disturbing. So we'll go on the rabbit hole there. When it comes to the parents then, like you said, so you've got the parents that are generally struggling. How do you actually empower them then? So you go to this place and the parents are literally like, the kid's not sleeping, just take them away. Like, how do you help educate a parent like that? Because I imagine you're trying to undo years, potentially, their entire life, their way of thinking this is how parenting should be. Yeah,
well, you come at it with the aspect that people are experts in their own lives, aren't they? You know, I'm not an expert in your life. You know your life and your history and all that sort of stuff way more than I do. I might have a general understanding of what family scripts and systemic type stuff is, and when I may say systemic, what impacts, you know, what could negatively impact you as a person, what could positively impact you as a person. And part of our role is to try and tease out those aspects and try and steer somewhere where actually you do recognise that drinking 3 bottles of wine a night is not only going to negatively impact your health and your mental health, but in turn, your health, mental health, the fact you haven't got any money for food is also going to impact your child, and therefore your child's suffering harm as a result of what you're doing. There's the extreme ends of things where, perpetrators of domestic violence, so, dad hits mum in front of child, or, it used to be, it's only sort of relatively 15, 20 years where domestic abuse is now so prevalent that we understand the impact that has on a child, even screaming at each other through a wall.
Kids can still hear
Kids can still hear that. And there's a study, and I can't for the life remember the author that did it, but kids in utero can feel that level of volatility and aggression. And
well, of course, it doesn't make perfect sense because the mother, literally, the mother and the child are one.
Absolutely.
So if the mother's stressed, that stress hormone goes into the child.
Yeah,
and so obviously, people know that this is the bizarre thing about how the body works. I've had some amazing guests on talking about energies and all that sort of stuff. But you fundamentally look at, you understand, well, most people understand that if you're smoking or taking any sort of drugs and you've got a baby, the baby will be affected by that.
Yep.
Again, to the extremes of literally becoming out addicted
Yep.
to just having some mild things. But then we don't talk about like the actual the hormones that are coursing through our body.
Yeah.
The fact of if you get anxious, you get that feeling in your stomach, that fight or flight response.
Yeah.
When you're coursing those hormones of adrenaline and cortisol through your body, the baby's getting that as well.
Yeah.
So then you have this baby that's already predisposed to being an anxious wreck. And then their whole entire life growing up in that environment as well. And for me, it's like no one really talks about that effect of the mental health of the mother in and of itself as well.
Yeah. And then what you'll see is you'll see certain aspects of, their speech and language might be delayed. Their fine motor skills aren't to the point where their peers might be at a certain age. Some of that is about what they may well experience in utero. Some of that is also around, neglect, all that sort of stuff. So right from sort of, pre-birth all the way through to sort of the imprint years, sort of 5, 6 and beyond to sort of teenage type behaviours. Because if you're a young person, and one of the conversations that I used to have with parents when I was at the coalface of work is, you're doing this now. The research shows and the evidence shows that if you carry on, your child is going to make, poor educational choices. They're not going to achieve in certain aspects of education. They're going to make poor life choices because that's the research. Trying to get a parent to understand that, because not everybody's a social worker, not everybody's a psychologist. Trying to get them to understand that is an extremely time, labour situation to be in as a worker. And there isn't enough of us to do.
Because what you said there, it's like you're going into this case, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to essentially psychoanalyze this parent. Right, what makes you tick? What is this world you're living in? Yeah. And again, if that parent mentally isn't okay, every time you see them, there could be a different version of them that's coming.
Absolutely.
I'm not talking necessarily about personality, say, but I'm
Yeah.
talking about if they're depressed.
Yeah.
So you've caught them on a day where they're severely depressed.
Yeah.
You're trying to read this person's, well, what makes them tick. And then you've got to go away. That person thinks, well, that Jay's a bit of a weirdo. And
Yeah.
then carries on doing what they were doing.
Yeah.
And then you come back in the next day and you're trying to talk to them like, okay, they maybe give you a bit, and then you go, wait, that Jay's a bit of a weirdo.
Yeah.
And nothing really gets done with it. It's
Yeah.
like, but then you're trying to get them to use their language, get them to understand in a way that sort of they do.
Yeah.
It's like one of Mikey's friends, I can't remember for the life of me who it is. Martin Illingworth, is that the one about the fishing story? Is that him? Yeah. So about talking about school teacher, basically got this kid who's sort of struggling. He finds out the kid likes fishing, so he relates everything to the fishing, and then that's how he connects with that child.
Yeah.
Sort of the same thing. Like, what makes his parent tick?
Yeah.
That I can use that to actually help them. And again, people don't realize that is very hard to do. That
Very
is like
hard.
psychological, but you do it from a person that's potentially very resistant to it, and you're basically insulting their parenting skills.
And has had years, because that might be how they were parented.
Yeah, and
You
they
know,
think they're doing a
that's
great
their
job.
script.
They think they're doing a great job. They
Yeah.
genuinely think, well, this is what I have to put up with.
Yeah.
Like, I got hit, so there's nothing wrong with me hitting this kid.
Yeah.
And you're trying to explain to them, no, you kind of can't do that. It's gonna, no, but
Yeah.
this is what happened to me. I'm okay.
I didn't go to school,
I'm
so
okay.
I'm
Jay,
not bothered if-
I'm
yeah.
okay. Who are you to tell me I'm a bad dad because I hit my son?
Absolutely.
And it's like then
Yeah.
straight away you're trying to relate it to, but no, but listen, like,
Yeah.
because then you're then trying to make them admit in a way that they aren't okay,
Yeah.
and that's affected them. And again, that is like therapy level stuff
Yeah.
that people pay hundreds of thousands of pounds to
Yeah.
unpick, and
Yeah.
you've got to go in there and try and do it.
Yeah.
I'm guessing in probably an hour, and you probably see them every 2 weeks or something like that. I'm not,
I mean, yeah,
what I'm trying to say is that your job is extremely difficult. What
Yes.
you've actually got to try and do is you don't have, like you said, the resources all the time to sort of do it. It's like, how do you do it? Because I'm getting like, I'm like, mate, the more I'm talking about it out loud, I'm like, mate, that's really difficult.
It's very hard because I've worked up and down the country. So, you know, when I talk about casework, I'm not talking about any sort of specific authority. I've worked up and down the country. But it's an extremely difficult situation to do. I mean, some of my workers and some of the work that I've done, you know, you're visiting families where the police will visit in threes and you're going on your own. And you're potentially telling a father that the way in which you're treating your children and your wife or partner is going to detrimentally impact your child's future, both emotionally, financially, physically, in the future. And if you don't stop, we may well be going down the line of, can your child live with you? And the police visit them in threes. So you've not just got the aspect of trying to get them around to the way of thinking, because their way of thinking is their way of thinking. Yeah. And sometimes, sadly, you can't get them there. So you have to enact other plans. You have to look at other options for these children, bless them. But it's a very there's no right or wrong. At social sciences, you work with humans. You know, I work with a guy up north. One day he was absolutely fine. Then he'd have smoked his way through the evening, you know, with his psychedelics, and then the following day he was a paranoid, schizophrenic mess. You know, how do I work with that? That's a long period of time, and sometimes you can't. It's got to be done in the time frame that's right for the child ultimately, because you're there to protect children. And if you think, well, that's, you know, it's going to take such a long period of time, how else do we involve ourselves, or the courts involve ourselves, or the police involve us in themselves? And that's when you have a multi-agency type approach. Who's going to do what? Schools are involved, health's involved, police are involved, you know, child mental health services are involved, to try and work on that situation. Whilst we're trying to work on that situation, whilst we're also involving other family members who might be a positive influence on them, to try and do what we call like family group conferencing type stuff, to try and steer it, because a social worker is only one person, and they've probably got a caseload of above 15 to 20, and it used to be years ago we had 30, 32, I had 40 cases at one point, you know. But
I imagine though, back in the day, like you said, when you had the other supports in place, those 30 maybe have been easier to manage.
Refer to.
Because you're getting them after they've sort of done certain things. So you kind of know, well, I know what I'm dealing with here. Now you're doing the job of all those things. So you've got all these cases, and you're like, you don't know what you're going to get with it. And it's like, you've got to put different hats on different things. And it's like...
There's never the same day. You know, you'll get the same... I mean, we've had casework come through in my career where, you know, I remember when I first started out working with the parents, you know, because the script didn't change. And they just carried on, and then those teenagers I worked with, then I went on and had kids, and they didn't change that behaviour, or they went even further with that behaviour. So I'm now working with the kids of the kids that I worked with years ago.
Yeah.
You know, that's really hard pill to swallow, that is, because we failed.
Yeah.
You know, and I say that in the broadest terms because we only failed because of the time, labour, and the lack of resources that goes into something like that. We didn't fail as an individual because we did what we could with the time we've got. And a lot of social workers will work well into the night. They'll be writing I've written court reports at 2:00 in the morning because I know it needs to go somewhere the following day. You know, we've worked to the point where our own children are being, you know, put to bed by a childminder because we're protecting other children, you know, and that's also a really hard thing for a social worker to deal with, because actually sometimes you're working round the clock to make sure that children are safe. The higher end cases I'm talking about. But even that is a very time laborious process to go through.
Let me flip this up a bit then, because I didn't want to go down. I didn't think I was going down this route. How do you look after your mental health in that situation? Because that's a lot to carry on your shoulders, and you've got fucking big shoulders. Yeah. That's a lot to carry on your shoulders to know that, like I said, potentially your daughter, neglect's the wrong word, but it's like because she's childminder or something like that. So you know, you're like, I'm not being the best dad today because I can't. Yeah. But I know I'm doing the best thing for that. So then what you've got is that little bit of guilt. It's like that, and then you've got to deal with this. And then you've got to deal with the other case you've got coming up. And then you've got that one that kind of looked like this, that kind of didn't quite work out a few years ago. You've got all this stuff going on inside your head. How do you stay mentally strong? Because that is, even just me describing that right now, I'm like, that's a lot to carry. How do you make sure that your mental health's okay? And how do you make sure your team, because now you're at the top, like you've got people beneath you. Yeah. How do you, and again, I know this is a very loaded question here, how do you make sure that yourself and your team's mental health is okay, dealing with but essentially the worst of the worst in some cases, with lack of time, support, and finances? Like, how do you deal with that?
With a great deal of difficulty.
Yeah, and that was a very loaded question. And again, there's been no preloaded questions here. This is all on the cuffy, because it's like the more you're talking, I'm like, mate, like that. I can see how very easily you can be not okay mentally with that, because there's a lot on your shoulders there. Well,
so my eldest lives with me. My youngest lives with her mum. So my eldest has lived with me for a great many years, and there were those times where I felt I've not done right. I wasn't here. There's one point where I was working at a local authority, but I was leaving at 6 a.m. because work was so difficult, and I was getting back at 8:00 at night. And partner at the time would be putting her to bed and doing all that sort of stuff, and I felt awful. But the older she got, the more honest I was with her about why I do what I do, and that paid dividends in a way, because I don't talk case specific. I wouldn't tell her the gory details of stuff I read and see on a daily basis. But, you know, I'm really sorry that I wasn't here last night. However, you know, today we're going to go and do this and going to do that. And she resented me. She did resent me as an absent father for, you know, I never see you, you know, and she was right. She didn't at one point, because you become sort of so spread thin because you're trying to protect all these children as well as trying to protect the emotional welfare of your own child. But explaining to her that there are children out there who need somebody like Dad and Dad's colleagues to help them be as successful as you and as wonderful as you, and positive reinforcement about who she is as a person, that helps her, and it helped me, because I knew that she was getting it, you know, right at that spongy stage where she was taking it all on. I also, we had hobbies that we do together, so we do martial arts together. You know, I tried to get her into the gym. She wasn't interested in that. You know, but I take a real interest in her schoolwork as it was. Now she's at college, so, I always remember, and I said it, I think I said it on the podcast I did, Mikey, with Jamie, and I said, you know, one of the biggest telltale signs is now with my daughter, she's 18 in December, is when I come home and she asks me about my day. And I go, Dad's day was, do you have any meetings? Because, you know, she thinks I just sit in meetings. She's probably right. And I'll tell her about my meetings. I won't go into detail, but I say, I had this meeting with, you know, Carol. And she comes into work sometimes and she'll have lunch with me at my office and she'll meet my teams and they all dote on her as well. I've even had the dog in the office, you know, with my daughter. But she once said to me, "Oh, I've done this today, but I know you're not interested," and that hit home.
Yeah.
And I had to stop and go, no, I am interested. And I'm not arty. She's art and graphics.
Yeah.
I'm none of that. I like looking at art for a split second and then I move on. I think Mickey Flanagan said I could do an art exhibition in 2 minutes flat. There's a Weatherspoons down the way. But that's, but I probably have to retrain myself that I need to be who she needs me to be as well. And that is really energetic when you've got a job like mine. But it works, and I'm exhausted with it all. I'll be honest with you. I am exhausted, but it's an exhaustion that gives me a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment.
Absolutely.
Because I've protected who I've protected at work, and now I protect, obviously, I don't just protect and have a hand in protecting young people and children. I also, help protect my staff's mental health and do all of that sort of stuff. But I also, that sense of fulfillment that my daughter has grown to be a very, my 10-year-old is as well, she's getting there, a very well-rounded and very balanced individual. She knows what she has is not what everybody has. She relishes in the opportunities that she has had, and we've been on holidays and travelled and done all that sort of stuff. So she knows, she doesn't know, she understands that although we're not massive millionaires, she's had quite a privileged set of circumstances afforded by somebody that works extremely hard to protect other children. So in a sort of misguided way, she sort of benefited from the work that I do and the background that I've got, because I'm not the dad who will shout and scream, and I've never sort of hit my child, and I've always talked through things, being a single dad of a teenage girl, that's very difficult.
Communication is definitely going to have to be the key.
Certain things that they talk about, certain things that they want to talk about, certain things that they don't think you want to talk about, because I'm a sort of 40-odd-year-old male and I'm dad. They might be embarrassed to talk to me about. Actually, I've got her to a position where she's comfortable enough to tell me anything.
Awesome.
And she does.
Yeah.
So I'm comfortable in who she and my youngest ones are. The chalk and cheese, they're two different people. But I'm very comfortable with who they've turned out to be. I have no worries or concerns about their future emotionally. I've shouldered all the things that I needed to shoulder as a dad.
So how have you dealt with that then?
What do you mean?
So with you, so like I said, so with all the stuff that you've got, how have you dealt with your mental health in this? Because I said your job is stressful. How do you make sure that you are mentally okay? Because it is very hard when you're in it to make sure that you're okay, if that makes sense. Obviously you can see your team when they're struggling, but who checks in on you? But essentially what I'm asking, do you check on you? What stuff have you got to make sure that you're in a good headspace?
For many years, I checked in on myself. I grew up in a situation where I was hypervigilant, hypersensitive, and was living in a world of trauma. I'm quite a resilient individual, and I think that stood me in good stead to cope with what I cope with on a day-to-day basis now. Not everyone, I wouldn't want that for everybody, and that's not how you'd want to build resilience, of course. But it has. It's made me. It's moulded me, and it's. What was it Arnold Schwarzenegger said? You're just a lump of clay and you just chip away at the clay, and it's the same thing about your human body. It's also the same thing about your mind. You've got to train your mind to be a certain way, and if your imprint from those spongy years of sort of 7 to sort of 18, you learn to be resilient. Things won't faze me, perhaps how they might faze the person sat next to me. My brother, for instance, who was older than me, lived at his friends most of the time. He'll say, I couldn't do your job. I couldn't do what you do. Well, okay, but I wouldn't expect you to. No. And, he's a lorry driver. Couldn't drive around in circles all day either. I don't want to do that. But that's built a level of resilience in me where I don't need much in terms of being able to have an outlet. So I go to the gym most days. Yep. I've done many years of martial arts, and I've done that with my children as well. And they've got enjoyment. I've seen them be very successful, and I've been very successful in competitions and stuff like that. And I'm all right in my own skin, to be fair.
That's an interesting thing. Like I said, most people couldn't do what you do, but you can do what you do because life has happened. I've got this saying, like life happens. Well, I say I've got a saying from Tony Robbins originally. Life happens for you, not to you. It's like this whole thing. Everything's happened. It's happened for you to be this person, so that you could be molded into this super Jay. to essentially be this like
cut that out,
to be this protector of these kids. Because I said to do what you do, like you have to be a certain kind of person, but you are now to do some of these kids. And I use the word deliberately Super J because you are literally like Superman to some of these kids. You're going in and genuinely making such an impact, and you can only do that because of the stuff that's happened to you. And I think that's such a massive thing that people don't realise. Like, and like I said to you earlier on, like your ability to actually communicate with people and chameleon. Like you as a person, like I literally met you at the door and straight away I felt at ease in your company. That's the art of communication is very lost within people. In fact, you can now communicate with your daughter on that level. Yeah. Everything's happened to you in that childhood. Like I said, it's made you who you are now. It's made you very, very good at your job, which a lot of kids will be thankful for, and a lot of your team will be thankful for as well, because you're clearly the kind of person that like is a very solid physically and mentally as a person. Like you're very, very broad, very strong. You can handle a lot. Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't have that in their life. That person that can handle it, if that makes sense.
But I think those people that don't have that in their life do need people around them to be that as well. And I'm comfortable for certain people, I am that person. I've got friends who will turn to me and I'll only ever hear from them when life's gone down the pan. Yep. You know,
but mate, same with me.
And I'm okay. And I'm okay with that. You know, because you know you'll always be my friend, whether I see you every 5 days or every 5 months. If something goes up the shitter, I'm still here for you.
People, I don't think people understand that, because I've had that before. And people are like, but they only talk to me when they're struggling. It's like, I'd rather them talk to me when they're struggling than I find out something's happened to them.
Absolutely.
It sounds bizarre. Like I literally get people that don't, and they'll just mess me out of the blue. Like, I'm really struggling. Can we go for a walk? And I will literally drive 2 hours to go and have a chat with them because I know they're struggling. It's like I don't mind doing that because it's like I know that I can help burden that. People say to me sometimes, and again, I'm not perfect all the time. Like I do generally sometimes struggle. Like Mikey knows my own struggle. Like I did struggle a couple of months ago with some stuff that gone on. It got too much for me. That wasn't my job. That was something external. Yeah. That because I was doing my job and I was giving so much energy there, I didn't have the defenses to deal with that. If that makes sense. But I will always be able to shoulder that burden because you kind of almost put that barrier up to be like, I can help you here, and you're protecting yourself in the same way. If that makes sense, you're protecting yourself while you're helping another person.
And part of that is the hypervigilance and hypersensitivity. So I can walk into a team room, and I manage a number of teams now and a number of staff, and I can walk into the team room and I can tell an atmosphere's changed. I can tell if somebody's struggling, you know, and I've had some really good managers in my time, you know, in all aspects of in every job I've had some really good managers. I've had some really poor managers. Managers that were very sort of process-led, statisticians, you know, this needs to be done, that needs to be done, this needs to be done. I have to have a balance, and if my staff, so going how I assist my staff, for instance, if my staff can see that I have a balance, yes, you need to get that done. Of course you need to get that done, but I also understand that actually you dropped your toast this morning, it landed butter side down, and that's really pissed you off. So, and that's a systemic angle, because anything, you know, any day, at any point in the day can impact the next 7 minutes, 7 hours, 7 days. It can, because people internalize things absolutely differently. Yep. So I have to understand that both at home, in my personal life, and at work, I'm working in social sciences, I'm working with people, and they could have not slept very well. They could have had a car breakdown or a puncture on the way to work. They could have received a very nasty phone call from a parent. You know, they could realise that they're slightly behind on the paperwork and be panicking about how to get that done. So, and especially during the pandemic, for instance, where we weren't together, and you know, how do you build resilience with people who aren't together? And the Saturday, you know, and I put on these sessions every Friday, I call them wellbeing sessions, every Friday from 3 till 5. And that was a safe space for them to come in on Teams and sit there and just talk about the weekend, vent about something, have a discussion about things that were bothering them. It's tailed off now because we're now back in the office and people are bouncing. It's lovely to see the bounce. And I've spent probably more time in the office in the team rooms than I should. I should be at my desk doing my job. But I'm
you understand the importance of it, though.
Absolutely. So I'm present in the room, and I was there today, and I'd done a big drive, and then I did a meeting, and then I just sat in the team room, and somebody was talking about something, and I took an interest, you know. And I think taking an interest in each other, not necessarily being a supervisor or the manager of that service, taking an interest in each other, so you know, the social aspect of it means the world to them, and they can go away on a Friday and know that they've had a conversation. I'm interested in, you know, how their son or their daughter's doing. You know, you said you got sports day. How did that go? You know,
and they're heard.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing, like they're heard. They're not just doing all this job and Jay's just their boss. Like, actually, Jay actually cares.
Yeah.
I mentioned in passing 2 weeks ago, my kid had a sports day and it was in 2 weeks' time, and Jay's in 2 weeks' time gone, oh yeah, by the way.
Yeah,
like,
how did it get on? Yeah.
That means more to people than being like, oh, do you want to do an extra grand a month? Obviously, money goes a long way, but money only gets you so far. It's that actual connection with people and actually showing that someone actually cares. I think fundamentally, if we sort of go back, again, very cautious of time here, but go back to what we're going to talk about from the kids' angle here, I think that's a big thing, that like lack of not being seen and heard.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest fundamental things that kids struggle with when they are in that bad place mentally, and they can be easily manipulated by gangs or the other vices that are out there. It's that lack of connection almost, isn't it? And we spoke about the father figure. Yeah. I think a lot of the stuff I spoke to when I go to inner city schools and I work with them, the teachers, they've got such a bad relationship with women. The way they talk to women, but if they've got a young headmaster that comes in, they're actually more respectful to him. And it's normally because, again, very stereotyping here, that most of these troubled kids that are there, single parents, they live with their mum, they've got no respect for they've got no male role model, they've got no one sort of to have that male figure. They then go to school, their teachers they're females as well, and there's no male role model there to actually help them, show them what it means to actually be a man, a positive male role model. Yeah,
but on the flip side of that, I also work with young people who are young males who have absolutely no respect for males at all, because the male role models they've had in their life have been volatile, aggressive, drug users, alcoholics, and they accept the work from a female rather than a male. And actually the male workers they've pushed and shoved and been quite volatile. So they're still following that aggressive script, but it's easier for them to work with, or they feel it's easy. And they'll tell you, it's easier for me to work with a woman than a man because I don't trust men, and finding those niches with young people. And we're so quick in society to label young people, bullies, damaged, all the other sort of aspects or labels that you could find, on a Primark shelf, for instance. You'll label adults do it probably more than other children, to be fair. And actually, there's a narrative behind how somebody has arrived at a certain point, and the ability to understand the narrative and then the motivation to change that narrative will make a huge difference to that child's life, regardless of what's going off at home. That's why the old farm bust the work that they do. I mean, I was there last night, and I wouldn't.
The kids were awesome, aren't they?
Wouldn't miss it for the world. We were there last night, and there's some, and I know some of these kids. There's some tough kids there, and
it's the same crowd from when I was there, Mikey. It was a different crowd.
Yeah.
So I've done it. Yeah.
And do you know what? So we were playing football with them and we're doing what they're doing. They're doing often their little activities, and we just stood there, and it was getting quite fresh. Real difference to last Monday where we didn't do it because it was too hot.
Yeah.
And then they all was running around, and we sort of said, "What are they doing?" And they were playing hide and seek. They're just playing hide and seek. We'd given them that space to just be kids. So at home they will be on a phone or an iPad if they're fortunate enough to have them, or they might be listening to something that they don't want to be listening to, or they might be sat in the room on their own. But giving them a safe space, just watching them and just play hide and seek. Of course you can. And one of the adults there, they said you can be on, you can find us. And I was stood with Chrissy, and we were saying, look at this lot. Just playing hide and seek, which is something I've not seen a group of children do for a very, very long time. Yeah. So not labelling them and allowing them the freedom of expression and not boxing them off like we do in all aspects of society, to be fair, not just children.
Yeah.
And allowing that freedom of expression and allowing them to do what would come naturally to them worked. And there needs to be so much more of that. That's what we're lacking in society now, is those safe spaces for young people to be young people, for children to be children. Running intrinsically with all that sort of stuff is the social media aspect. There was a statistic on the way here, and stuff like that sticks in my mind. You're going to spend 22 years of your life on social media. So a quarter of your life you're going to spend on social media. That's the statistic on the news on the way here. Well, that's massive. And the influences that social media has on young people and what is expected of them, combat that with what's happening at home, what's happening at school, and all the labels that come with that. You're not wearing this, you're not doing that, you're not TikTok famous, you're not doing all this sort of stuff. I think the pressure on our young people now is far greater than it's ever been in terms of, and they label themselves.
Because it's not like when we were growing up at school, especially you, because obviously you're, how is it, you're 40 now?
42, yeah.
42, so again, you're like 10 years older than me, 11 years older than me. Like, it's even... So it's even like we're looking at our age, the difference in us growing up at school.
Yeah.
Like when we were getting bullied, we were only comparing ourselves to the kids in our school.
Yeah.
Now, the kids are comparing themselves to the 14-year-old millionaire on YouTube.
Yeah.
That is literally the 0.01%.
Yeah.
The anomaly, the outside, the outlier, but the kids are now judging themselves on that. So they're now not only judging themselves on how they are in their own school, they now think they're a loser in the entire world.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very dangerous... Social media's got a lot to answer for. I think it's positive. There's a lot of positives.
Yeah.
But it's so unregulated with the younger lot, it can be so, so toxic. We talk about that narrative, the voice inside your head.
It's how it's used, isn't it?
100%, but there's no manual on how to use it.
No.
And it's deliberate because you've got to think. So when you're inside your head, you're bullying, like we did, you go home, you start bullying yourself. You can then go on social media and get factual proof to bully yourself even more.
Yeah.
I'm a loser. No, you're not a loser. Social media. See, look, I am a loser because this. Yeah. Look, I'm this. Why aren't I as pretty as that? Why aren't I as pretty as that? Look at this person. And it gives you like actual factual stuff.
Yeah.
To then confirm all the stuff's in here, and it causes.
But it's all for likes, though.
Yes,
Daniel, isn't
exactly.
It?
But why would you want to like this? I think there needs to be some sort of user guide. There's something.
The
with
witch
it.
guide to social media.
Do you mean? Yeah. Do you mean? I feel like it's so. It's like now with like AI. Like I think artificial intelligence is amazing.
Yeah.
But unregulated, that's got potential to be absolutely catastrophic. We've all seen I Am Legend. Is it I Am Legend? I Robot.
Yeah.
We've all seen that.
Yeah.
It's like, and we all laugh about it, the Terminator. We all laugh and joke. But I mean, some of these things now are very, very smart. Like the AI can talk. It's created its own language.
Yeah.
That should be a red flag. But with social media, it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
We're letting these kids, when you said, when they're most pliable, most malleable, letting them just run riot on these things.
Yeah.
And it's basically taking their innocence away.
Well, we've already established I'm 10 years older than you. But when you was...
11 years. 11 years.
11.
What? It's 9. Why 9?
42.
Oh, 9 years.
There we go. Thank you for that. Keep that in.
You're all fired. You're all fired.
But when you was at school, or when I was at school, I had 2 or 3 friends that I chameleoned to, and they influenced me, and I influenced them. You spent all day, every day with them.
Go around their house.
You go around their house, you sleep over, you do the paper round with them, all that sort of stuff. That they were your influencers. That's who you sort of aligned yourself to, and you weren't too, because you like I say, I aligned myself with the kids who were kind of not a similar background to me, but had a similar sort of narrative in terms of their day-to-day life, as it were. Now, my daughter can sign into social media, is influenced by millions of other people. At any given point, she can press a button and somebody can be trying to sell her some makeup, to porn, to all this sort of stuff that makes life for our children so distorted as to what reality actually is. But then that is their reality, because social media is only 15 years old, isn't it, really? In terms of, I came off Facebook, I'm not on it. I've got Messenger, I have Instagram, I have Snapchat, because it's the only way I think my daughter will probably text me. But I've only been on that for 3 days, because I think she never responds to a message. I ring her, she never answers the phone, but Snapchat. She'll answer a Snapchat. And it's so then do the job that we do, and have all those other outside influences, as well as the influence of the parents or their older siblings who might be abusive towards them, and then them internalise what's happening out there in the world, and how do we expect their mental health to fucking well cope with that?
Yeah.
And that's why you see a lot more in the news now about mental health issues in young people. We don't have the resources to cope with that. It's a ticking time bomb. And I speak from experience in work. The amount of work we do now where young people have sort of been sectioned under the Mental Health Act. This is young people who've been sectioned. It's not adults. Yeah. With eating disorders, with self-harming issues, all those sorts of stuff. What do we do? What do we do?
What do we do? Like, what is, in your experience? Because again, you've had experience this for a number of years.
Yeah.
What is, in your eyes, the answer to this? Like what can we do? Okay, right now, let's say as a parent listening to this, I'm not a parent, but a parent listening to this, what can they do to kind of protect their child from this?
Listen to them. Understand. Don't just listen to their words. Listen to them. And I said it on Jamie Booth's podcast a few months ago. Your child will get up in the morning. They will immediately, if they've got a phone in their hand, they've changed slightly just by reading something that perhaps they didn't read the day before, your child will be a different child when it comes home than it was when it left for school in the morning. It will be a different child when it watches a TV program, because it's learning. Kids learn at an exponential rate. And if you are not listening to what they're saying, you know, we see those. So you see those photos, I do, probably too often than I'd like to, where, first day of juniors, last day of juniors, great. Well, they've not just changed physically, they've changed in terms of their life expectations, their influences, their behavioural patterns, their emotional resilience. Absolutely everything's changed, and that changes hour by hour. They could have an argument with one of their friends, and they're not their friends at the end of the day, and they come home and they stick their head in a tablet. And as a parent, if you're not listening to that, and I mean listening to the fact that they're not even present in the room anymore, that can have catastrophic effects in the long term about a child's sense of worth, place in the world. You know, I'm not a perfect parent, you know, and I think it was Jamie who said, what's the Jay's handbook of parenting? I wish I knew, because every child is different and every child's going to be influenced. The only thing we can do as parents is to try and buffer, because it's our job to buffer as much as we can the external issues that will dramatically affect our children, to try and keep them in education, to try and keep them, you know, with the right choices in life, because they're going to be impacted hour by hour, day by day, more so now than they did in the 80s and the 90s, you know, because there's so much information out there. You will be changed from this conversation. I will be changed from meeting you. Even as adults it happens. Imagine as a child, with all those external influences happening, and then perhaps a really shitty home life as well. You know, just listen to what they're saying, listen to what they're not saying, probably more, because 70% of communication is non-verbal, 30% is verbal. If you're not listening to their body language, or they're constantly upstairs in their room, or you haven't seen them for a few hours, whereas normally they'd be at the dining room table, or normally be in the room watching Coronation Street with you, listen to that as well, because they're changing. They're changing absolutely all of the time.
That's probably one of the most powerful 5 minutes of a podcast, like when it comes to like parenting and actually how to help the younger generation, that I think I've had on my entire episodes. That was, I'm going to leave it there, and I want to get you back on at some point to know. I want to sit with this, because we can have a whole episode, I think, on what we just spoke about in that 5 minutes, but really expand out. Not necessarily Jay's guide to parenting, but with stuff like that there.
The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
But I think with stuff like this there, some of the stuff you spoke about, because again, you literally just went off on there for 5 minutes. No, absolute gold. But I think actually, if we construct this properly, we can really unpick some of that stuff, because that's a lot of the things there, like what's your kid not doing? Yeah. That stuff like that there is absolute gold. Normally I say to people, where can people find out more information about you? But I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to ask is, if someone's worried about a kid or something like that, or parenting or something like that, what is the correct thing that someone should do? Is it like a helpline you've got off the top of your head that you can...
It depends on which local authority you work in. I mean, there's, you know, I'm an advocate for the sort of Childline, the NSPCC services. You know, they will refer through to our type of service. You know, they take the information, they pass it on. Every local authority has a helpline. They have a website that you can report concerns into. Doesn't matter which local authority it is, they always have that. You know, if you think something's amiss, don't be afraid to, you know, you can do it anonymously, you know, don't be afraid to say, because actually you involving yourself for 30 seconds of making a phone call could significantly change the outcomes for a child there and then. You know, if you see something that is you are uncomfortable with, you're uncomfortable with that for a reason, tell somebody. Talk to somebody, even if it's the school teacher. They all have safeguarding, procedures they have to follow as well. So if you see something in the playground, or you see something on the way to school, and you know that kid goes to school, your child's school, tell the teacher. They will refer it in for you. You know, that's the only advice I could give you with that. If it's something that makes you feel uncomfortable, it's making you feel uncomfortable for a reason. No,
always listen to your body. Again, we spoke about that on the podcast before, like your intuition, like it means something, so listen to it.
Yeah.
Jay, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you.